Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever lain awake at 2 a.m., replaying a conversation you had 3 years ago? Have you ever typed a message, deleted it, typed it again, deleted it again, and then just never sent it at all? Have you ever made a decision and then spent the next week questioning whether it was the right one, even when it clearly was? If any of that sounds familiar, you're not broken. You're not weak. You're not too sensitive. You're an overthinker. And there are far more of you than the world admits. Because here's the thing about overthinkers. They're everywhere. They're the friends who remember every detail of what you said months ago. They're the ones who write 3 drafts of a single text message. They're the ones who look calm on the outside. But inside, their mind is running 1,000 simulations at once. And the world has a habit of misunderstanding them, calling them anxious, indecisive, exhausting. But what if the real story is far more fascinating than that?
Most people assume overthinking is just thinking too much. But psychologists describe it differently. Overthinking, or what researchers call rumination, is the tendency to repetitively analyze thoughts, situations, and problems without ever reaching resolution. It's not deep thinking. It's looping thinking. The mind returns to the same point again and again, not to solve it, but because it doesn't feel safe to let it go. And that distinction matters enormously. Because deep thinkers arrive at answers. Overthinkers arrive back at the question. There's a particular kind of mental exhaustion that comes with this. Imagine running on a treadmill for hours, expending enormous energy, sweating, straining, and ending up in exactly the same place you started. That's what the overthinker's mind does, every single day. But here's what's rarely talked about. Overthinking is almost never about the thing it appears to be about. When you're replaying that argument from last Tuesday, you're not really thinking about Tuesday. You're processing something older. A fear of being misunderstood. A wound around rejection. A deep need for control in a world that feels unpredictable. The surface thought is just the door. Behind it is an entire architecture of emotion.
Now, before we go further, let's talk about something that almost nobody says out loud. Overthinkers are often the most capable people in the room. Not in spite of their tendency to overthink, but sometimes because of it. Research in cognitive psychology has found that people who engage in deep, repetitive reflection often show higher levels of empathy, pattern recognition, and long-term planning. They notice what others miss. They anticipate consequences before others even see the problem forming. They ask questions that don't have easy answers, which is precisely what makes them extraordinary problem solvers when the stakes are high. Think about the overthinker who spends 45 minutes choosing their words in an important email. Is that inefficiency? Maybe. But that email also
won't be misread. It won't accidentally hurt someone. It will say exactly what needs to be said. Because when an overthinker agonizes over a choice, whether to take the job, end the relationship, move cities, they're not being weak. They're being responsible. They feel the weight of decisions before they make them. They carry the consequences in their imagination first, so they don't have to live with them carelessly in real life. That's not a flaw. That's a form of conscience. So why do some people think this way, and others don't? The answer almost always lives somewhere in the past. Psychologists have consistently found that chronic overthinking is deeply connected to early experiences of uncertainty and unpredictability. Children who grew up in environments where they couldn't predict how adults would react, where love felt conditional, where mistakes had consequences that seemed disproportionate, those children learned to scan. They learned to run mental simulations before acting, to study faces, read tones of voice, rehearse conversations, because in their world, being wrong was dangerous.
So the mind developed a sophisticated early warning system. The problem is, that system doesn't always get the memo that the danger has passed. Even decades later, in safe situations, with safe people, the mind keeps scanning, keeps simulating, keeps preparing for a threat that may never come. And what was once a survival strategy becomes a habit that's very, very hard to unlearn. This is why you can't simply tell an overthinker to just relax. That's like telling someone who learned to swim in a stormy ocean to stop kicking their legs just because the water is calm now. The body remembers. The mind remembers. And it protects, even when protection is no longer needed. Here's something overthinkers rarely talk about: how lonely it can get.
Because overthinking doesn't just happen in private. It bleeds into relationships. The overthinker reads into pauses, into short replies, into a tone of voice that shifted slightly. They construct entire narratives from a single unanswered message. They wonder if they said something wrong, if they're too much, if they've pushed someone away without realizing it. And the cruelest part? Most of the time, they're wrong. Most of the time, the other person just had a busy day. But that reassurance doesn't always land. Because the overthinker's mind isn't looking for truth. It's looking for certainty. And certainty is the one thing human relationships almost never offer. So they withdraw sometimes. They go quiet when they most want to be close. They hold back words because they've already imagined 12 ways those words could go wrong. And the people around them mistake the distance for coldness, for indifference, for not caring.
When really, the overthinker cares so deeply that they're paralyzed by it. This is one of the great misunderstandings between overthinkers and the people who love them. The silence is not absence. The hesitation is not a lack of feeling. It's the opposite. It's feeling too much, all at once, with nowhere safe to put it. At the core of most overthinking is a single quiet terror: the fear of losing control.
Overthinkers often believe, somewhere beneath the surface, that if they think hard enough about something, they can prevent it from going wrong. That if they rehearse every possible outcome, they won't be caught off guard. That if they analyze every angle of a relationship, they won't be blindsided by loss. It's a beautiful, painful illusion. Because life doesn't reward the person who thought the hardest. It happens to everyone. The prepared and the unprepared. The careful and the careless. With equal indifference.
And on some level, overthinkers know this, which might be why the overthinking never fully stops. Because the moment you accept that you cannot control outcomes, you have to face the vulnerability that lies underneath. The raw, open fact that you can be hurt, and there is nothing you can do to prevent it entirely. Overthinking is, in many ways, a refusal to surrender to that truth. But here's what the overthinker eventually learns, if they're lucky. Control was never the goal. Peace was. And peace doesn't come from solving every thought. It comes from learning to sit with uncertainty without being swallowed by it. So the next time you meet someone who thinks too deeply, who deliberates too long, who reads between lines that perhaps weren't meant to have anything between them, don't dismiss them. Because that person is carrying something.
They're carrying a mind that refuses to be lazy about the things that matter. A heart that takes other people's feelings seriously, sometimes more seriously than their own. A spirit that is trying, constantly and exhaustingly, to do things right. Not for applause, but because they genuinely believe that how you treat moments and people matters. Yes, they may lose sleep over things that resolve themselves. Yes, they may hesitate when the world wants them to move quickly. Yes, they may ask the same question 10 times, not because they didn't hear the answer, but because they need to feel certain before they trust it. But they are also the ones who will remember what you said when no one else did, who will notice when something's wrong before you've even named it yourself, who will think about you long after the conversation ends, not because they're obsessed, but because you mattered to them. And in a world full of people who move too fast, who feel too little, who skim across the surface of life without once diving in, the overthinker is the one standing at the edge, fully aware of how deep the water is. Not because they're afraid, but because to them, depth has always been worth the discomfort. Maybe the world doesn't need fewer overthinkers. Maybe it just needs to finally understand them.